I think the Hizmet movement is crucial in contemporary Islam. I teach about contemporary Islam. I happen to be a Muslim. I'm also a scholar of Islam. And as I understand the Hizmet movement, I'm not part of the movement, but the movement means service. And for me as a Muslim, this is crucial. This is really the heart of what it means to be a Muslim, to do service to others, you know, in the Quran.
But what has not been true until now is that there would be a figure, a person who could represent for the West the progressive face of Islam. That is, a Muslim deeply rooted in Holy Quran, deeply rooted in the teachings of Prophet, deeply rooted in classic Islamic thought, who could show the political, the ethical significance of the Prophet and his teachings for today's world. In my view, until Fethullah Gulen, there has not been a single figure who could represent that attractive face of the teachings of the Prophet for the entire West.
I cannot do justice to the critical importance of this thought, of Gulen's thought and theological outlook to the contemporary Muslim world, because it offers for Muslims an authentic, legitimately rooted methodology of dealing with modernity and the challenges that we exist in the modern world. And so it focuses on what you can say is the nectar of Islam, the core, the heart, the spirit of Islam itself.
That the Hizmet movement is doing the thing that matters is to serve humanity. And the Prophet had said that the best of you is those whose fruit of labor benefits other human beings. And the fruit of labor is labor, it's service, it's not talk. And I think the Hizmet movement personifies that, not just by the name itself, that it serves humanity, but by action. And I think their greatest virtue is that that service is not limited to any particular religious community. It's universal.
This is the attempt to celebrate all of humanity, and I think that's why Hizmet is different from other religious groups.
We see in Mr. Gulen a man teaching God's words, living a life that, as best we can see, is indeed directed by God, that is pointing a life and teachings that are pointed towards the eternal, that comes from the eternal, that is not focused so much on the temporal, on things that are passing, but on things that will last. And we understand his teachings to those who are his students, his disciples, to be of that same kind. That is, to teach his disciples, to teach his students, to be the sort of people that are God-directed, that are eternal-oriented and not temporally oriented. And so not focused on passing politics, on passing economic schemes, on anything that is indeed passing away in this age. But what is the fruit that will last? What is it that will be given back to God, because indeed it comes from God? And so we return to him the gifts that he already has given to us.
Hizmet movement represents Islam in the sense that the members who identify with the Hizmet movement are really inspired and motivated for community service and for their professional lives from the values that they locate in Islam. And some are very universal values, like the concept that God is merciful. So they represent Islam in the sense that these kinds of things that are not specific only to Islam, but that they have in common with other faiths, are very important.
Alexis de Tocqueville a 19th century French observer of American culture, had a phrase in describing America of habits of the heart. And perhaps one of the greatest contributions that the Hizmet movement can make in the world, or is making in the world, is teaching these habits of the heart associated with generosity of spirit, of giving. And they do this without any request for payback. It's an unrequited gift, one that is not expecting anything in return. An example of true love.
We've said many times, if there is peace in the world in the future, it's going to be people like members of the Hizmet movement and others who will pull together to understand each other and to talk it through and bring about peace. Mr. Gulen is an impressive person, not because of his person or his personality or his organization, but because of his ideas. My impression of him is that he's a very humble person. He has a strong point of view about various things, but he seems like a very humble person, one who listens and encourages listening and sharing and building. But it's his ideas that are the power. I see the Hizmet movement as the best expression of Islam that I have seen anywhere.
I read in, I think it's in Mr. Gulen's book, Faith and Tolerance. I was intrigued by love and tolerance. I don't usually use the word tolerance. For me, tolerance is a negative term, meaning I'll put up with you. But that's not the way that I've come to understand Mr. Gulen uses the term tolerance. He talks about let your heart be as tolerant as the wide open ocean. And that indicates to me an openness to allowing the other to enrich you as you enrich them. And that's the perfect definition, I think, of interreligious dialogue. And I certainly see this as a prominent feature of his teachings.
I've been learning more about him over the last several years, and I have done some reading of his sermons and have taken a look at the kind of commitments he has made, building upon commitments of earlier thinkers in Turkey, committing himself to science and education and pro-EU membership, and just a solid message of moderation and cultural dialogue and outreach.
Hizmet seems to me to be a very good representative of the best in Islam in terms of being open and feeling a responsibility to the world, and the pluralism that is evidenced in the Quran, which tells us to respect all the prophets and all the people with the book.
Mr. Gulen is, to me, simultaneously both incredibly modest and a visionary. And I see that anyone who has studied his words or has come in contact with him or has become part of the education projects that he began long ago has also had the transforming power of service, education, peacemaking, and dialogue. And so it's strange to think that one person with a deep heart and a commitment to living so that others may live can really change the world. And yet I see this person, Mr. Gulen, as someone who's not interested in personal power or personal acclaim or making speeches about himself. It's really about letting others live.
I have read about Fethullah Gulen. Of course, I have never met him personally, but I've read some of his writings, and I have read some analytical articles about him that were written by people who were not members of the Hizmet movement. And I know something about the controversy. Is he the real thing? Is he what he says he is? Is he what his supporters say he is? And my personal experience is that he really is the real thing. He has written about how important it is to have a religious grounding but secular education. This is my personal background as well. He is in favor of engagement and dialogue with people of other religious traditions. That's very important to him and the movement.
I think it's rare to find an organization which is so bottom-up driven, which has gotten the principles so deeply ingrained into every member that you can talk to anybody and get the same feeling of what the commitment is to Islam, the commitment is to doing the right things in the world, and the personal sacrifice that Hizmet members produce.
I have been very impressed by Gulen Efendim. He's a wise man, which is not all that common in the world anymore, I'm afraid. He's a learned man, which means that he understands his tradition very, very well. And he's an open man who is interested in dialogue and doesn't feel that in a religious debate someone has to win and someone has to lose. He believes that in a truly open religious debate, everybody wins.
As we are a minority that's misunderstood here, the efforts of the Hizmet movement and Fethullah Gulen to help Muslims here and around the world speak in our own voice as opposed to being represented or misrepresented in media is something that we benefit from tremendously. Mr. Fethullah Gulen's movement, the Hizmet movement, is making tremendous contributions to Muslim culture in today's world, in that it's helping Muslims focus on education so that we can contribute to the betterment of this world. It's helping Muslims focus on cultural exchange so that we can be better understood in our own terms for what we represent. And the Hizmet movement is allowing and inspiring Muslims to give something back through relief work. And that's a significant contribution to the Ummah. As an academic, as a historian of Islamic history and sciences, Hizmet movement, I see, and Fethullah Gulen, does a great job in representing authentic Islam.
There's a certain characteristic of people who have been influenced by Fethullah Gulen that is incredibly beautiful. There's a serenity and a peacefulness and a dedication, a generosity of spirit.
From my own personal perspective and in my own experience, it's no exaggeration to say that Hoca Efendi is one of the great leaders of our time, especially one of the great spiritual and moral leaders of our time.
He says that Muslims should be compassionate, kind, just towards other people, whether or not they embrace Islam. I find those two characteristics of his reading of the Islamic tradition, his interpretation of the Islamic tradition, to be quite remarkable.
Our world is in need of the Hizmet movement in every, culture, in every place where Muslims exist, because it provides a good model of what a group and an association of Muslims should look like.